Hey everybody! The purpose of this video is to review our emergency preparedness and response plan. This is something we do upon hire as well as review annually. This does vary for each center, so do me a favor and double check and make sure you are watching the one that pertains to your center. This video is for Loving Care 2. So looking at our emergency preparedness and response plan, it does contain a lot of information. It is a very lengthy document. It basically outlines any emergency we could possibly have and how to appropriately respond to it. In the plan itself, which is always kept in the lobby or office, labeled EPR plan on the spine, it does have a whole list of emergency contacts. This covers everything from police, fire, EMS, poison control, animal control, food suppliers, healthcare professionals, our licensing consultant, our Stanley County health consultant, the health department, mental health services. All of this information is contained in this document if you were ever to need it. We also include the utility companies that we use, restoration services in the area, such as who we use for carpentry, who we use for air conditioning, our insurance provider, stuff like that. All right, so in here it goes over, let me get to it. Oh, we already looked at that. It has a floor plan of each center, so basically just a label of which classroom is located where. It also contains the same information for where each group goes for a fire drill, where our fire alarms and fire extinguishers are located. That is something you definitely want to be familiar with in your center. So go ahead and take a look around your classroom, see if you have a fire extinguisher in your classroom. If not, figure out which classroom nearest to you does have one. I know at Loving Care 2, we have them at a lot of places, specifically the kitchen. There's one right beside the kitchen door if you were to need to get to it quick. Let me keep going. So risk assessment, the policy makes you look at your center and are there any certain risks directly in your area. Obviously, we are right next to a pond and we have almost a little drainage stream type of area on the other side of the playground. So this center is considered a risk for a flood zone. So that's something you want to be aware of. You want to keep an eye on when it rains, that type of thing. Emergency preparedness goes over the procedure for accounting for children and adults. So every classroom should have your emergency contact books, which contains up-to-date information on every child on roll in the classroom. If that is not something you have, you need to let me know that you need updated copies and which children you need it on. You should also have some sort of attendance record in your room. For the purpose of emergencies, I prefer you to use the dry erase checklist, just because your attendance does not always show who is in your care. Your sign in and out sheets do, so that would work as well if that's something that you have in your classroom at the time. For example, right now, sometimes they're kept up front because we're still signing kids in and taking temperatures, whereas on a normal basis, if you would rewind to 6 months ago, those were located at every classroom. You're going to want to take something that shows exactly who is present at the moment of the emergency. If your fire alarm went off right now, what could you grab that truly showed the children that are in your care at the current time? We definitely want to make sure those are on hand and everybody knows to grab them and take them with them, as well as your emergency contact book. Making sure that those children are signed in when they get here and signed out when they leave is a big part of this, just so that we do know if a kid left early. We don't want to be looking for them in the middle of an emergency. Remember, right now, if you are signing a kid in and out, you do need to leave your initials or name so that we know who was signing the child in and out. When it goes back to parents being able to sign in and out, we need to make sure that we're following up with them to make sure that as they sign a child in and out, they are including their name, their info, so that we know who got the child. Visitors are also required to sign in and out at the front office. If you ever have a visitor coming to your room, please make sure that this is something they did before coming in. This goes for therapists, DSS, anybody who is not a teacher or a child or a parent. They need to sign in and out on the visitor log so that we can track their visits. Let's see, so in my previous video, we went over our emergency medical care plan. This kind of has the same info in it. It specifically tells you who is in charge of calling 911, of providing first aid, providing CPR. It also goes over who decides when we evacuate, who decides when we go into a lockdown, who decides when we do shelter in place. that will be me for the purpose of the EPR plan. I know we went through this with I think it was the tornadoes last year. So we know for one, if you ever get the certain alert on your phone, you automatically go into your shelter in place area. But if it's a situation where you don't have a direct alarm to go off, there's no black and white yes or no, you must hide now, or you're fine right now, or it's getting kind of iffy, that's when the call is mine. You would, if I'm not there at your center, you would have somebody contact me to make that decision for you guys. The person assigned to communicate with families would be myself. Summer also has on here that we would put things on Facebook so that parents had a direct resource to go to if they couldn't get through on the phone lines. So for a lockdown in your room, the purpose of a lockdown is to get your children in a safe place. This is away from doors, away from windows. That's your big things. Think about it. If there was an intruder trying to get in, what is the safest place for your children? For some of you, this might be the same place as your shelter in place area. It might be your bathroom. It might be your closet. For some of you, it might just be a corner of the room that is not accessible by doors and windows. Your room should have some sort of wedge block that you can place under your doors. That way, if somebody were to try to get in your classroom specifically, you have that door blocked. If you don't have that, let me know so that we can get that for you. I believe at 11 Care 2, we just installed locks on the baby room door and the 1-year-old room door. I mean, the 2-year-old room door, I'm sorry, that connect to the front lobby. That way, those can be locked. Because if you think about it, if you can't get in from that way, then all you have to worry about from there is your outside doors. We want to make sure that we know how to respond to these things quickly. Make sure those wedges are in an obvious area of your room. I would say close to your door. I would label a spot on the shelf. That way, no matter who's in your room, they know that this is where the door wedge goes. While in lockdown, we want your lights off, blinds closed, windows shut, that type of thing. Your goal is to keep the kids quiet. Now, we realize you're in a child care facility. This is hard. So it's definitely something you want to practice with your kids. Sing songs with them about it. Do quiet activities on the carpet. Maybe have a little go-to kit that's some quiet activities that you could grab to easily get to that quiet area during your lockdown to keep them entertained. So specifically on here, it has our 1-year-old room would be in the corner area to the right nearest the door adjacent to the infant room. 2-year-old room would go in the restrooms with the door closed. 3-year-old in the restrooms with the door closed. The NC pre-K room would go in their restrooms with the door closed. And the same with the school age room. So those are all pretty easy. Shelter in place is a little different than your lockdown. So shelter in place is, let me look. That is designed for more like your tornadoes, your threats to the building. So that's when you want to get in the safest area for that, which means you don't have an outside door or wall or anything like that. You want to be in the innermost part of the buildings. Now, sometimes this is physically impossible. At your center in particular, there's not necessarily always a spot that doesn't connect to an outside wall. So your goal there is to get away from doors and windows that connect to the outside. So it would really be the same kind of spots we just looked at. So your bathrooms, your closets. And for some of your rooms, this means leaving your classroom. The infant room and the 1-year-olds don't have a safe spot in their room, so they would come into the 2s, which means the 2s would probably need to combine with the 3s. The pre-K would still have their own bathroom, and the 4s would, the school agers would have their own bathroom. So that all still works well. If you're in the area such as the lobby or the kitchen, you would go to whichever place you can get to safely and quickly. Evacuation plans. So evacuation would be for fire drill, gas leak, anything like that. So most commonly what you guys see is the fire drill. So you do need to know where your room goes for the fire drill. Infants and 1-year-olds are to go on their playground. Now I have okayed it for the infants to go out to the parking lot. If that's easier to access with the cribs, the evacuation cribs, make sure you're using those. Basically, you're just getting out and away from the building, but you need to figure out what that designated spot is. So that means our infant room teachers would need to communicate which spot you want to use. If you want to stick to using the playground with the 1-year-olds, or if you do want your spot to be the parking lot, we would just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page there. That way, if there were an emergency, they don't think that you're still in the building just because you're in the parking lot. Your 1-year-olds go to a far corner of their playground. Same with the 2s, 3s, 4s, school age. You're all evacuating to the playground, and you want to be down at the shelter, down at the corner of the fence, far away from the building. Make sure your groups are staying together, so you don't want your 2-year-old, half of your 2-year-olds over here and half of them in the shelter. You want your group to stay together. Your goal is, once you all get to your assigned area, that you check your attendance again to make sure that you have all of the children that you should have. Transportation plan by vehicle. This is, if we were to have to get you guys away from the center, it would be the responsibility of myself, Summer, Jerry, to make sure that we can safely transport you all. So that's also considered evacuation on site. That's what you're doing for a fire drill. Evacuate to a neighborhood location. If this were to need to be done, you guys are going to, let me see. You're going just to Carolyn Holt's house. Should have guessed that one. So you're going right next door. If for some reason we had to just leave our building in particular, you would go right next door to Carolyn Holt's house. Your out of neighborhood location would be Tillery Academy. That's where our safe place would be. Everybody would be transported to Tillery Academy. Our out of town location would be Quality Childcare in Oakboro. We have an agreement with them to where if we were to have to evacuate our town completely, they're a closed safe center that would be able to meet the needs of our children. Let's see. If we were to have a true emergency, kind of like when we did the tornado drill, the things that you're going to want to easily be able to grab in your room would be the things that are going to meet the needs of your children. So, for your younger rooms, you're going to need wipes. You're going to need diapers. This is not the time to worry about, okay, do I have a diaper for every child? It would be more so just grabbing enough diapers to meet their needs. You would grab their bottles with water, their formula cans, get all of that in with you. I suggest bottled water, snacks, stuff that you can keep in your room that is easy to grab and take in with you. Make sure that if you have a child with medical needs, that you have their stuff easy to go, such as an EpiPen. If you have a child with blood sugar issues, make sure you have the type of snack or drink that they would need, that if they were to start experiencing those symptoms, you would be able to treat them in your area. Let's see, we have a reunification plan in here, which would only be used by me, Summer, that type of thing. And basically it tells us exactly how to get in communication with these parents if we were to have to do any of these things. Let's see. So now we will go over each drill specifically. Fun. So your first thing that it goes over is a bomb threat. Let me show you what this notebook looks like. This is kept under the front desk. So if you were to ever need it to reference any of these things, like I said, it's just labeled EPR on the spine. It has the layout of the building and playgrounds on the front of it. So on here it says bomb threat. If you were to receive a written bomb threat, you would want to touch it as little as possible. Save it. And don't respond to it, of course, and call 911 immediately and the director if the director's not there. If somebody calls over the phone with a bomb threat, you are going to try to keep that person on the phone for as long as possible. Get as much information as you can. If the caller ID shows their number or name, get that written down. And have somebody else that you can communicate with to call 911. Now, I don't recommend being on the phone with them as they're threatening to blow you up, saying, hey, will you go call 911 while I talk to him? No, I would say write it on a piece of paper and hand it to somebody explaining what's going on. At that point, we would also evacuate, which is where you would follow all the steps that I just mentioned, making sure you have all of those things needed to safely evacuate these children. If we had an earthquake, you're going to instruct everybody to move away from the windows. Tell the children and adults who are able to stop, drop, and hold on. Assist children and adults who need help moving away. So this would be your infants. Obviously, if you tell infants to move away from the window, they're not going to move. So you need to make sure that you get them in a safe area until all the shaking stops. So following an earthquake, your next steps would depend on what the damage is. So you may need to shelter in place, or you may need to evacuate. That would just be determined on the situation. So if you're going to shelter in place, you're going to go to your designated site, which we just discussed. If you're going to evacuate, that's when you go to your next door location at Carolyn Holt's house. If we were to have an explosion, This again depends on exactly where the explosion is. So say there's an explosion in the kitchen that does not necessarily impact any of the classrooms, we would just evacuate the building. That's when you would go to your safe meeting places, which is your fire drill places. If you were to be trapped in the building, things are different. If the explosion trapped you guys in, you would move all into a specific room so that everybody could be together. You would take with you all the things that your children need, your attendants, your emergency contacts, the diapers, the bottles, that type of stuff that we talked about. And you need to tell the children that are able to cover their mouths and noses as they're walking through stuff, because there's going to be debris and nastiness floating in the air. Fire and smoke, we kind of just talked about. When you hear that fire alarm go off, you evacuate immediately, but in the safest way possible. This needs to be something you practice with your children on a routine basis, not just when you hear us ring the bell for your monthly fire drills. So practice having them line up. One thing that I saw as a teacher was some of these kids got really excited and they would try to dart out the door without me. If this was a real emergency, that is not how I want these kids to handle it. So that's something we had to practice. We had to practice ringing a bell saying fire drill, and they stopped what they were doing. They didn't clean up. They didn't mess with anything else. They went and lined up, and they waited for me to have what I needed before we exited the door and went to our safe spot. A flood watch. So a lot of this depends on your classification of a flood. Obviously, things get a little rough around us here at Love and Care too, but so far we've never had to evacuate for a flood. If we were to have to evacuate for a flood, that would most likely be because our roads right here are inaccessible, so we would have to wait for help to come to us. So you would still, this is when we would be notifying families. This is when we would make sure we had everything to go, like your diapers, your formula, your wipes, that kind of stuff, your emergency contacts, everything like that, for when we needed to evacuate. But most likely in our area, if we see floods, we're going to be contained inside of our building. Gas leaks. We don't have any gas here, so that's not something we need to worry about. But if we had a gas leak, we would evacuate the building immediately no matter what. We would also move to our safe site next door at Carolyn Holt's house, just in case the leak caused an explosion. We want to be as far away as possible. Hazardous material spills near the facility, you would shelter in place in a safe room unless somebody contacted us saying that we had to evacuate to our out-of-neighborhood evacuation site, which would be Quality. Now, if there was a hazardous spill inside the facility, we would shelter in place in an uncontaminated room. So whichever room it happened in, everybody would be forced out of that room, and you would need to take your emergency supplies with you. Let's see. Now, depending on what the hazardous items are, if it is deemed unsafe to be inside with those, we would move outside. And depending on how quickly the hazardous spill was able to be contained, cleaned up, that kind of thing, we may have to look at going next door to Carolyn Holt's house and putting all the procedures in place to get children home safely from there. If we had a hostage situation, the first thing it says is do not put children, yourself, or other adults in danger. Remain calm and polite with the hostage taker and follow their instructions. Do not resist. Use a known signal to let staff know a hostage taker is on the site. Whoever can should call 911. Put the unaffected area of the facility in lockdown, which means you are turning off the lights, you are locking all doors and windows, close your blinds. Maintain quiet in your classroom. Take your attendance sheets and emergency contacts if possible. Move children and adults to the safest place, inside or outside. And assist children and adults who need help. Use your cell phone to communicate information. From there, you're going to meet at the safest meeting place. So account for all children and adults by checking your attendance sheets. Make sure they match up with who's actually there. Like I said, this is when it's very important to have either your sign in and out sheet or the dry erase type of sheet so that you can see. Just because Sally was here at 9 a.m. when we marked attendance, now that it's 3 o'clock, she got picked up early by Grandma, but I'm still looking for her. We want to make sure we have an alternate way to check who exactly is in our care at that time. You're going to gather information to give the emergency responders, describing what happened, the hostage taker, their clothes, their relationship to the hostages, the car they may have been in, license number, anything that could be helpful to them. You're going to want to provide first aid to anybody who needs it and follow any emergency responders' instructions. For a hurricane drill would be what we practice for this. Let's see. So preparing during a hurricane watch. This is when you would have those phones on with your weather alerts turned on. Obviously, we don't really have a way to watch the news unless you bring it up live on your phone. So those alerts are really our best bet. A lot of this stuff is more things that we would do, such as filling up the gas tanks in your vehicles that you would use to transport children away, making sure that you have stuff that your kids can drink if your water supply is cut off, deciding when the facility must close. So pretty much all of those steps are on us. If you had a hurricane, you would shelter in place. And that is where you're in your classroom in your safest space, away from doors and windows. Intruder would be pretty much about the same as a lockdown. It's just versus, I feel like the only difference here is you might lock down if somebody suspicious is in the area. Say we've had calls where somebody escaped the jail and was seen on Mountain Creek Road, so we go ahead and put the facility on lockdown. So you're going to follow the exact same lockdown procedures if an intruder was in here. Your only difference is your first step is going to be to call 911 as well as locking down your children. Landslide, I don't think that's something we would ever see, but if there was a landslide, you would prepare to evacuate to your out-of-neighborhood site. Loss of electricity. So this is something that happens frequently throughout the year with storms. Basically, what we're going to do here is we're going to figure out what do we need to do to restore electricity. A lot of times, Jerry can just bring over a generator, and we can combine the kids and get enough stuff going to keep them safe. The state does mandate safe temperatures. So as long as your indoor temperature is between 64 and 85, it's considered safe for loss of electricity, and as long as you can get them running water. So that just depends on your center completely. Typically, as long as we can keep it in those safe zones, we're fine until it cuts back on. Now, obviously, if this was going to be a long-term thing, we would have to look at sending the kids home. Let's see. Missing child from a child care center. So you would start, obviously, your first step would be look for the child. You need to inform your director that a child is missing. Ask teachers around you to help look for the children and see. They also need to look to see, are any other children missing? This is something that God forbid it ever happened, but if somebody came by and snatched multiple kids, but you're so focused on looking for the one that you never even noticed the others left, we're going to end up with a bigger issue. So ask caregivers and teachers to gather and keep children together in their classroom or as a group outdoors. Notify the family, notify the law enforcement, and be prepared to provide a photo of the child and any information they would need. As you search for the child, you are going to review activities before the disappearance and retrace the steps. So say you're inside, but 15 minutes ago you were outside. You're going to want to check that playground and see, did that child hide? Did they run back out? Because that's the most recent area you were at. Search inside the facility, classrooms, bathrooms, closets, hallways. Search outside, playground equipment, outbuildings, hiding places, etc. Search vehicles on the property and notify the family and law enforcement if the child is found. Let's see. If there's a potentially violent person, you would engage in the lockdown procedure that we've already gone over. If there is a rabid or dangerous animal indoors, you are, for one, going to be in trouble for letting a rabid animal indoors. But you are going to shelter in place if you can safely get away from that animal. But say it's in your classroom and can't be contained, that's when you're going to evacuate till you're a safe place outdoors. Threatening message. If we were to receive a threatening message, we would handle it, if it was a paper, we would handle it and touch it as least amount possible. Save it and call 911. If it's over the phone, we're going to do the same as a bomb threat. Try to engage them. Try to get information off of them while you have somebody else separately calling 911. Severe thunderstorm, this is something you're just going to keep an eye on. If you see that a thunderstorm is coming up, if it's thundering, lightning, obviously your kids need to be in the classroom and not outside. If things got really bad, super windy, then we would start to look at more of our shelter in place where you're going to go into that safe space away from doors and windows, preferably your bathrooms and closets. Tornado. You're going to prepare during a tornado watch. This is something that always confuses me. I feel like if it's a tornado watch, that means you're watching a tornado. But it's the complete opposite. So a tornado watch means that the weather conditions indicate that a tornado is possible in the area. A tornado warning means that one has been sighted nearby and you need to go ahead and get in your shelter-in-place area. So that is all of the drills and procedures to review with you guys. Other things that are found in this EPR book is an up-to-date emergency contact for every child in the building. It also contains the emergency contact on every staff member in the building, as well as any medical notes such as allergies, EpiPens, that kind of thing. That way, say we had to go to Quality for our out of neighborhood evacuation and the kids needed to be fed lunch. This binder is going to go with us and we can see, oh, this child can't have fish. Here's their doctor's note. We want to make sure they don't get a fish stick when you guys feed them. Same thing with all the milk allergies. Same thing with bee sting EpiPens, that type of thing. All of this is contained in there. We update it constantly as we get new kids, as things change with the kids. So we go over this annually, but if you guys ever have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.